Go.
Welcome to the monthly program of the Rhinebeck Historical Society. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I'd like to take just a moment to share with our members the upcoming programs for the next few months. On January 31st, we have Leonard Steinberg, who's going to talk about the Hygeology Country Club off Ackerd Hook Road. February 28th, Tony Musso, who many of you know from his weekly column in the Poughkeepsie Journal about local history, is going to talk about some items from his book, his new book, Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley, Part 2. Many of you were at his program on Part 1, and that was very well liked by many of our members. On March 21st, Christina Policino will speak about the history of Omega Institute and its relationship to Rhinebeck. April 25th, our own president, David Miller, and Marilyn Hatch will speak about the mills of Landsman's Kill. And on May 30th, Peggy LaBelle, who I think is here somewhere tonight, and I'm going to be joining with her to talk about Southlands. So tonight's speakers, the three who are here, and the fourth, Jane Gallo, who passed away a good number of years ago. Few realize, I think, in our community today, how much they have done for us, and particularly in the early 1970s. I don't want to steal their thunder by explaining what that was. You need to hear it directly from them. But you ought to be aware that the service that they performed for us was not unique. All three have been and remain devoted public servants. They have been volunteers of the highest order, and Rhinebeck has been blessed to be able to have them as a part of our community. Dory currently serves on the Rhinebeck Committee on the Aging. Not a small task, considering that she and her colleagues are responsible for the largest collection of senior citizens of any municipality in Dutchess County. It's over 30% of the total population of the town of Rhinebeck is over the age of 60. Back in the 1970s, when, Dory, I learned that you had been working as the, I hope this is not wrong, Director of Public Relations for Northern Dutchess Hospital.
Well, that's a pretty fancy title.
But when she wasn't doing that, she served as a member of the Village Planning Board. I think she got put on that as a result of the efforts she was involved in that we'll hear about in a little bit. She was also elected as a member of the Rhinebeck School Board multiple times in the late 1970s, I think it was in the early 1980s, at a time when such service could be even more hazardous than it is today. And Kay Verrilli has served as one of the founders and later the president of the Museum of Rhinebeck History, and she still serves, I believe, on that board. She's been president of the Quitman Resource Center for Preservation, has had a long relationship with that organization, has been a board member of Hudson River Heritage, and anyone who questions her credentials as an historian should be aware that when Toby Carey recently prepared a DVD called Sweet Violets about the violet industry here in Rhinebeck, the person that he most wanted to talk to and whose comments he valued the most, and those of you who have seen the DVD know that Kay is prominently featured in there, the person he wanted to talk to was Kay Verrilli. Kay was president of the Star Library, chair of the Conservation Advisory Council. Her real love, however, is horses. And in that role, she helped found the Landsman's Kill Trail Association. And you still see a lot of those LKTA tags on trees in a variety of remote places, the few that are left here in the town of Rhinebeck. And then we have Sally Verrilli, and Sally never rests. Well, they do, they do tend to do things together, so, there are a lot of Verrillis over here tonight. Sally Mazzarella never rests. When the walkway over the Hudson needed help a few years ago with their fundraising and organizational issues, who did they call on but Sally? She's the president of the Winnicke Land Trust. She's been associated with that organization for quite a few years. She's very much responsible for a Center for Performing Arts here in Rhinebeck that is no longer under a tent, but that has performances and classes and all kinds of things going on just about every day throughout the year. And without Sally, that would not be the case. When the Star Library looked to expand about 8 years ago, it was Sally who took charge of soliciting leadership gifts for their $2.2 million expansion effort. She helped run a $2.8 million acquisition project that benefited the Mid-Hudson Children's Museum. The list is far longer for Dory, Kay, and Sally. But I haven't talked about what they did for us some 40 years ago. And the work they did has impacted everybody here. And I'm not going to tell that story. They are. So I'm going to turn this over to Dory McKibben to start it off.
This is rather daunting. We didn't realize that many years ago that we were ever going to be in this position today. I was thanking you very much for inviting us here. And although it's very sobering to know that we are thought of as historical, since in the course of our efforts, I think it was Doug Palermo who called us hysterical. So this is definitely a step up. And my role tonight is to be the opening act. And so first I would like to introduce Kay Verrilli and Sally Mazzarella. And when we first started our great adventure, by meeting almost daily to the point where our kids asked us please to come home sometime, we didn't divide up whatever work we would do. We would just do whatever reading or whatever we learned overnight and brought it back to the next meeting. But certain talents became obvious very early. For instance, Sally could read a legal document and instantly know what it said. So she could explain all of those things to us. Kay knew Rhinebeck and Red Hook and the area so well that she could read the maps and she knew all the pieces of land people were talking about. Jane Gallo, I forgot to show this picture. Jane is our fourth fighting lady. She passed away in 1979, but we know she's here in spirit. And she's checking to see if Sally's ice cube trays are full. Because we always met at Sally's house, and Jane would be furious to find that she would have half-filled ice cube trays. So there you go, Jane. But tonight, we didn't divide up our duties, but tonight we did. I'm the opening act. Kay is going to tell you a little about how we actually first heard about the project that consumed us for a year, and then Sally, as she always did and still does, is going to do all the heavy lifting and tell you all of the statistics and the nitty-gritty of what we did. I must tell you that when we went over all of the newspaper clippings, which fortunately I think I was the only one to have saved them. The others had saved them and threw them away or something. It gave us great pleasure But it also made us realize that we had forgotten a lot of exactly how everything happened from day to day. So the order of things may not be exactly as they were. My job tonight is to tell you a little bit about how Rhinebeck was in the early 70s. So in my unreliable memory, I will say that in the 70s, there were 2 grocery stores, 2 drugstores, both a men's and a woman's shop, a hardware store, and then other businesses, of course, that catered to the people in Rhinebeck. But the most startling statistic that I can remember is I can only name maybe 4 or 5 restaurants. And you know, now we have, what is it supposed to be, 30 some or something? The Beekman Arms, Foster's, Copper Kettle, there was a snack bar at Skemmy's drugstore, Silver Pines out on Route 9, and of course, the Blue Moon, which was on Route 9 and 9G intersection. And until today, I thought my husband was the only one who ever ate there. And he ate there the first week he came to Rhinebeck. We were a week or 2 behind him in arriving, and he ate a dinner there. But Sally tells me that they stopped there as well. So there was more than one who ate there. It was a community where everyone knew everyone else and everyone supported everyone's efforts. It was a community where we said to our children, you may not know everyone, but they know who you are. So, they knew they'd better behave. Talk about a village raising a child. That's what was happening in Rhinebeck. But it was also a community that caught the attention of developers and investors. Our large land offerings were just too delicious for them to overlook. So things in Rhinebeck were about to change. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kay.
Hi again. I'd like to thank you for coming tonight and tell you how we got involved in the development that started in Rhinebeck. I had the opportunity to ride in the car with someone who was a lawyer in the town of Rhinebeck, and one of our few lawyers at that time. And in the course of conversation, he told me, or asked me, what I thought of the development that was being proposed across the street from where I lived on the Ferncliff property, and I think it was called Teen Challenge at that time. It later became Valor. Oh, you told me not to do that with that cardboard.
That's okay.
It's all right.
Keep your hands off, Sally, when you come in. 800 acres, he said, was going to be developed in something called a PUD that I had not heard anything about, and I think it was almost through the planning board at that stage, the development proposal. And it was going to, I'm not sure how many people were supposed to live there, but with 800 units, it probably is twice that. And I said I hadn't heard about it. Why hadn't I heard? Well, I hadn't heard because we didn't read the papers. We just knew what was going on in town, but no one had told us what PUD meant and what it might mean to Rhinebeck. So he said to me, this man who's going to develop he fits into the zoning, he has all the money, and there's no way you can stop him. Well, the other thing that we were doing at that time, the four of us, was supporting the hospital. We were all somehow connected with the hospital. And the second thing was bridge. So I don't know how my conversation ended with the lawyer, but when I got home at night, we were playing bridge. And the table I was sitting at, in the course of conversation, I told them what I had heard that afternoon. And what could we do about it? Well, they thought it was not the thing that should happen for Rhinebeck, as I did. So we decided that we would write a letter to the editor, tell him what we thought about the proposal. And we did that. But then when we did that, we realized we couldn't stop there. We, in our letter, had told the people of Rhinebeck, if they care about their future, whatever it may be, they should start going to meetings and listen to the planning board that was definitely showing its approval of the proposal. And so after we told other people they should write letters, we decided we better write letters too. And that's what we did. And you'll notice on the letters, just a minute, I'm not finished. You'll notice on the letters, the first 2 or 3 letters, Sally's name was not there. Someone had told us that Sally was in favor of the proposal. And over the course of the next year, we found out that she was not in favor. So I'll turn it over to Sally.
Good evening, everyone. The past couple of weeks has really been a lot of fun for us. The 3 of us have had an opportunity to reflect on the past and really reminisce, and there's so many wonderful, wonderful memories. And so I'm going to ask all of you to kind of reflect on your hometown some 45 years ago. And I hope it brings a smile to your face as it did to ours. You know, last week I was at a holiday party and people were gathered around sharing stories of their first experiences after moving to Rhinebeck. We all chuckled as someone mentioned that he remembered standing out on Route 9 outside the Beekman Arms, talking with some friends after dinner. They stood out on the street for 10 minutes and no one thought that they might be in danger of getting hit by a passing car. Well, that wasn't unusual in the late 1960s. Rhinebeck was a sleepy little town. Businesses served the people of the community. Violets were still being grown here. And as you know, we were known as the violet capital of the world. The fairgrounds at that time catered to the local churches and nonprofits that would cook homemade meals to help raise funds for community efforts. And while going through the clippings that you see here tonight, I came across a clipping that read, Hoffman's Farm Market in Red Hook, and it advertised large cantaloupes, 39 cents each, and sugar plums, 30 cents a pound. The New York Times in the early 1970s wrote, quote, Rhinebeck, the town that time passed by. Interesting, in 2010, and some of you may remember, the New York Times wrote again, Rhinebeck, the Hamptons of the North. It was during the early 1970s that the business community became concerned about their viability. Mike Ficara was then the president of the First National Bank of Rhinebeck, now M&T Bank, and he had asked Chuck LaForge, owner of the Beekman Arms, to chair a visual environmental committee. And the bank would start by funding a tree planting project along East Market Street and Route 9 to help revitalize the community. And those are those wonderful trees that you see lit up during the holidays. And this initiative really began a renewal of volunteer efforts in Rhinebeck. people began to understand the importance of community involvement. And it was the winter of 1973, and as Kay talked about her experience, when we four ladies became aware of the development proposal called Ferncliff, a proposal for an 800-unit residential development called a PUD, Plan Unit Development. It was a $21 million proposal on the 400-acre historic Astor property and the adjacent Obolinski estate located on River Road. And of course, the Obolinski estate was the wedding gift that Mr. Astor gave to his daughter. The Rhinebeck Gazette reported that a Douglas Palermo had come to town, a New Jersey real estate developer that was going to propose these 800 residential homes, and they were made up of 240 single-family detached houses, 410 townhouses, and 150 apartments. And the projections were that it would bring 2,000 people and 600 children. It also included 100,000 square feet of commercial space, consisting of specialty clothing shops, boutiques, antique shops, a drugstore, a barber shop, a beauty salon, a delicatessen, and other shops that would provide for this new population lined up along River Road. Doug Palermo stated that it was not their intent to have the commercial activities strongly compete with the village businesses, but instead supplement them. Of course, we four ladies didn't agree. We didn't believe that having 200% more commercial activity wouldn't be seen as a threat to our local merchants. The developer planned for Ferncliff to be a golf community, and we're proposing an 18-hole golf course. At that time, it was a new concept. Today, it's very common to have golf courses integrated with residential uses. They would use the Obolinski mansion as an inn, and Astor's $1 million barn would be the clubhouse. Of course, today, $1 million doesn't get you as much as it did in those days. It would have a pool and tennis court. They planned on using the village water system, and this, of course, caused a major stir among village trustees. There were those that said, hey, this is a great idea, maybe we can get more money for the village, and those that said, over my dead body. They had to also build their own sewer plant. And all of this development would happen over a 4-year time frame. And today we know it sometimes takes that long to get a project approved. The proposal did not discuss the need for new schools for those 600 new young people. And today our school population is around 1,200, so just think about the many school buildings that would have to be constructed and supported. They didn't discuss the need for a new fire department or more police or a new post office, the upgrading of town and village road systems, and so many of the important services that help make a community function. So what were 4 women going to do about this huge proposal? We knew nothing about planning a community, nothing about zoning and density, or how to handle water and sewage needs. We had 13 young children between us. We were young mothers running errands, running back and forth to school, ball games and soccer games, and of course we made sure we had dinner on the table every evening. There were no takeout restaurants in Rhinebeck at that time, and of course it wasn't fashionable to go out to dinner on a regular basis. A home-cooked meal was expected. We knew we had to educate ourselves, learn about PUDs and PDDs, plan unit developments and plan development districts. We studied the comprehensive plan and zoning law, which had only been adopted in 1969, so it was fairly new. It was 4 years old, and people didn't have the experience with it. We became better versed in these documents than the planning board members. We went to planning sessions at the Farm and Home Center in Millbrook. We went to hundreds of meetings, planning board meetings and town board meetings. We remember a town board member being annoyed at our questioning and probing and saying, Where were you ladies when this proposal was first submitted? And we responded, we were home with our children. We had learned that the planning board had recommended to the town board that they approve the Palermo 800 unit proposal, and that shocked us. So we began writing weekly letters to the editor, sent out flyers, went door to door, stood in front of the IGA and the Grand Union. Just think how much easier it is today to communicate with email, Twitter, and Facebook, and all of our other technology. Communications has completely changed. We needed to have community support, share with our neighbors the issues related to this project, the loss and threat to their quality of life. We pounded away every opportunity we had. Surprisingly, community members began contacting us, asking how they could help. They donated materials and printing services, drove around putting flyers in mailboxes, and they joined us at meetings. We became excited that we had reached the masses, so to speak. The town board had scheduled a public hearing for August 1st, the middle of the summer. People would be on vacation. The town board seemed to be supporting the Palermo project. The planning board had supported the project, and the Chamber of Commerce also came out in favor of it. Our school district, however, had great concerns. We knew we needed the community to come out in force to convince the town board that the Palermo project of 800 residential units and 100,000 square feet of commercial activity would devastate the Rhinebeck we knew. We needed to fill the town hall. We put on a full-course press. We decided if we could get to our young people that they could become our advocates, convince their parents that this development was wrong. Dory and I got ourselves invited to speak at the social studies class at the high school. The kids were really smart and they understood environmental issues. Dory reminded me last week that we used Legos to help them visualize the project. We clustered these Legos and we built tiers of Legos, and it really worked. We needed these kids to go home and advocate for this cause. Don't forget, in the early 1970s, it was still socially unacceptable to debate environmental impacts and issues. It was like a foreign language. But our young people would begin carrying that torch. As a side note, our classroom visits became a practice over the next 20 years for us. There were many major projects that we faced together, including heavy-duty transmission power lines being proposed through Rhinebeck. And would you believe it, history is repeating itself? This past Wednesday, I sat with one of 4 companies that are vying for a contract with New York State to install the 465 power lines through Milan and Clinton, a project that's going to start in Troy and lead down to Pleasant Valley. Well, let me get back to the 1970s and 80s. There was a coal conveying site which was proposed directly across the river in the town of Ulster, invading our viewshed from our historic district which lines the river. Land was being bought and reserved for a power plant. And I haven't yet talked about the gigantic Weingarten proposal that hit our town during the Palermo discussions. We committed ourselves to every one of these projects. Well, a week before the hearing, the August 1st public hearing, the town attorney called us to determine how many people could be expected to attend. We crossed our fingers and timidly said, about 200. And 2 days before the hearing, we called him back to tell him we thought perhaps there would be 400. And the town board became concerned and decided to move the public hearing to the fairgrounds to accommodate the large number of citizens. We had collected over 1,900 names on a petition and had over 5,000 donated flyers to distribute. We called on our children and they rallied their friends and started a bicycle brigade that hit every household in Rhinebeck with a flyer which encouraged people to attend the public hearing. We worked furiously to be prepared for the hearing, doing our research, calling other municipalities, talking to public officials where Doug Palermo had said he developed projects. I remember calling Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Palermo had bragged of his major development there. He said he had a big hotel and a residential complex. They knew the name. Nothing had been developed. He had come and gone. The big evening arrived. We met at the fairgrounds. The building was hot and people began filling the large open space. More and more people arrived. There was lots of excitement in the building. Fairground helpers began setting up bleachers. We could hear the clanging of chairs being carried in, and the people kept coming. We looked out onto a sea of people, and the building was full. Some 900 Rhinebeck citizens had turned out to defend their community. It was a precious and magical sight. The hearing began with Bill Allen, the town supervisor, setting the rules. People were given 5 minutes to speak. No one can continue past the gong or they would be removed. Everything had been well rehearsed. The supervisor then asked those that supported the Palermo project to please stand, and the room got very quiet. 10 people stood. They were seated in the second row. It was Doug Palermo, his engineer, architect, PR person, and a couple of other staff, and then 2 local attorneys and their spouses. There was dead silence. The supervisor then asked those that opposed the project to please stand, and there was an eruption of moving chairs. The remaining 880 people stood and applauded. Of course, it took lots of time for the supervisor to regain control of the hearing. Then lines began to form. Speaker after speaker expressed their concern for losing all that was precious to them, losing their sense of place and the community they loved. Some statements were very technical, hitting on zoning violations and environmental constraints, and others spoke from the heart about the pride for their community and the threat to their quality of life. It was a very intellectual, inspirational, and emotional experience, creating one of those memories that last a lifetime. 1 hour, then 2 hours, then halfway into the third, a storm erupted. Rain pounded the metal roof of our building so hard that speakers could no longer be heard. There were still lines of people waiting to speak. The supervisor was forced to close the hearing, and it would be continued 1 month later in September. About 400 to 500 people returned to the second hearing, and the pattern of championing the cause to deny approval repeated over and over and over again. We then waited patiently for 3 months for the town board to make their decision and continued to pressure them. We attended all the local meetings. We remained vigilant and the center of intense controversy. The local papers noted that while Douglas Palermo called us the 4 hysterical ladies, others referred to us as Rhinebeck's 4 fighting ladies. And then 11 months after Douglas Palermo came to town, the town board was ready to take a vote. It was a December board meeting. 75 people attended. We sat quietly through the routine agenda. Then Supervisor Allen read through a lengthy resolution listing 26 reasons for its motion to deny approval of the Palermo 800-unit residential proposal. It was a 5-0 vote that was greeted with laughter and applause. And I learned tonight that Herman Tejan wrote that resolution. Following the vote, the supervisor announced the resignation of the planning board chairman and another member of the planning board. We four fighting ladies were exhausted, exhilarated, and extremely grateful to the community for hearing our message and supporting our cause. The press had also been very helpful and supportive. Little did we know that the Palermo proposal was just the beginning of a very long journey in public life for each of us. Jane Gallo ran for the town council and won a seat. I was appointed to the town planning board and chaired it for 20 years, and community planning became my passion. Dory was appointed to the village planning board, and Kay the town conservation advisory council. Well, I hinted earlier that Victor Weingarten had his gigantic proposal. During the Palermo episode, Weingarten was meeting with community leadership behind closed doors. He had suggested a project having 20,000 residential units with large-scale commercial uses. Yes, 20,000 units. So few people in the community were aware of this. This number dwarfed anything we had heard about from the Palermo proposal. Weingarten had worked for the federal government as a consultant. HUD, the Federal Housing Urban Development Corporation, was making huge sums of money available and encouraging these new towns to be developed, called Planned Development Districts. That's where the PDDs came from. They would include housing, schools, fire departments, religious institutions, parks and trails, business and industry, well-planned road networks, and all that makes a community whole. Within a few short years, these proposals would mimic the natural organic fabric that historically represents a community. We four ladies needed to learn more about this concept that was being proposed. Fortunately, community leaders discouraged Weingarten from discussing 20,000 unit development that would consume some 1,600 acres of land and house some 50,000 to 60,000 people. Weingarten that met with the Chamber of Commerce quietly and discussed 8,000 units, a major reduction in size. However, it was also too large for them. He then went public with a number of 4,000 residential units, including major commercial space, schools, firehouses, water and sewage, and all the rest. The revision would house only 12,000 to 15,000 people, he said, and would be built over a 15-year period. This was serious stuff. In came the three-piece suits, lawyers, planners, architects, PR people, and engineers. It was overwhelming. Never before in Rhinebeck's history had we faced a project of this scale and a team of professionals that would be discussing major environmental, cultural, economic, and educational impacts on Rhinebeck's quality of life. We urged the town board to hire their own consultants to even the playing field. We four ladies were not against development and growth in Rhinebeck. It was the scale of these proposals that were so out of character for a small rural community. What was being proposed was plopping an urban environment in the middle of our countryside. These projects were bigger than life, almost surreal. We were lambasted by Weingarten at a chamber meeting. He accused us of whipping up a lynch spirit in Rhinebeck. The local paper quoted him as saying, "Let me tell you this, before we're hung in effigy, there will be a bloody fight." And I think one of these clippings, you can read that in the paper. We needed to further educate ourselves. We urged our new friends at the Farm and Home Center in Millbrook to organize a planning tour to areas that had been developed as PUDs and PDDs. We traveled to Pine Run, New Jersey, Cross Keys and Columbia, Maryland, and Reston, Virginia. Each planned community varied from 1,100 units to 30,000 units, with Reston, Virginia spread over 7,400 acres and consisting of 5 villages located 18 miles south of Washington, D.C. We met with community representatives, local officials, and county planners. Each of these developments started on a blank page. Each new town was created with a 0 population. They were all in close proximity to a metropolitan area. They were all well-planned, orderly, and seemed somewhat artificial. We were amazed that with such large populations, the people were nowhere to be seen. We were the first to admit that there were some very strong and positive aspects in this type of development. However, none of it was appropriate for our hometown. However, we learned a lot and returned to Dutchess County as experts in PUDs and PDDs. We traveled around the county, Dutchess County, visiting community after community, discussing the merits and faults of this development concept. We became well-versed in these issues and believed that we had the capacity to begin challenging the Weingarten proposal. And we did this year after year after year. We were relentless. Fortuitously, the economic climate changed in the 1980s, and Weingarten decided that he could not take the financial risk of continuing to pursue his proposal. He was his own worst enemy, criticizing everyone who challenged him, vicious in his remarks. He made enemies and was asked by his own consultants to stay away from the town meetings. Weingarten left Rhinebeck an unhappy and angry man. He was disgusted with the 4 fighting ladies. However, I should tell you that Victor Weingarten did return several years later and developed the Woods at Rhinebeck, and it is a great neighborhood. It has about 170 units, and it's a big cry from the 20,000 units he originally discussed. Dory, Kay, and I smiled a lot and took great pride in our ability to play checkmate with the likes of a Victor Weingarten. I thank you very much and hope you've enjoyed these comments. Dory and I and Kay will be happy to answer any questions.